Good morning from Vietnam. Thanks, Jeanette and Maya, for spending your evening to join and share your stories with our audience around the world. And on behalf of the listeners of the show, we want to say thank you.
Thank you to the listeners of the show and to you.
And Jeanette, have you been to Vietnam before?
I have not. It's on my bucket list, though.
Yeah, so now you have new
Yeah,
friend, new family. Travel here, and we will take you guys around town and show you how beautiful our country is. Okay.
sounds good. Do you want to book a time right now, or should we do that afterwards?
Anytime, Jeanette. And on our in our culture, it's very honor for our audience if we can have you to do a little introduction about who you are and the works that you do. Would you please do that for us?
I will indeed. As you have already said, my name is Jeanette Bronee. Now, that doesn't sound very Danish, but I'm born in Denmark because my ancestors were French. So, and here I am living in America for close to 35 years now. So, who am I? I am a curious being who believes that being human is an awesome advantage that we need to learn how to harness. And why do I say that? I say that because I grew up with a bipolar mother who was undiagnosed and later untreated because she believed in the stigma that if you have mental illness, there's something wrong with you. And so I grew up with this sort of mentality around um, our emotional and mental health not being integrated. And it took me a long time to learn how to do that. It took me two burnouts. I was working in the fashion industry. All of a sudden, I had two parents that had cancer at the same time. And after that, I decided I no longer wanted to be a fashion person. I wanted to be a health person. So I started looking into how do I help people survive work better, because I felt that it was not fair that we had to choose between our success and our health, which I felt I had done. And so for the past 20 years, I've been focusing on rethinking self-care in the workplace. And that's what I do today as an author, as a keynote speaker, and as a culture strategist, I guess you can call it. I work with leaders around how do they change the culture in their teamwork, in their company as a whole, and how do they sort of harness that human advantage that we are, even if we can't see it every day.
Wow.
That's the short squeeze of why I am who I am today,
And then
not just what I do.
we're gonna use this 1 hour to explore it in the longer version of it. Okay, so uh, let's travel time, Jeanette, to know how everything started at the beginning. All right. When I was young, I always wanted to become an astronaut, and that's part of my introvert personality. I like to jump in different planet and where it's quiet, right? But life did not give me any things, any opportunity to do the works that I really love to do, right? So when you were young, living in Denmark, what was your dream about your future, though?
Well, maybe it's a telltale. At some point, I wanted to be a librarian because I love books. I think I sort of got out of that, and then I wanted to be a flight attendant, and then I realized, no, I want to be a fighter pilot. And then none of that happened, of course, at all. But those were the dreams of who I was going to be. I could not have imagined the life I have now whatsoever. And to be honest, all the plans that I've had for my future since I was a little girl, none of them worked out.
So not a librarian, not a flight attendant, not a fighter pilot. How did you get into the world after that? Into the business world, though.
Yeah. Um, I think the ambition. I always had ambition. I'm an only child, so and between being an only child and a mother who's bipolar, there was a lot of me having to navigate the world, the reality of my daily life on my own. It doesn't mean that my parents were not around, but it meant that I protected my parents from knowing how I was bullied in school and so on and so forth, which you can argue is really sad that I, as a little girl, decided I had to protect my parents from knowing that. But that was something I created the, I guess you can call it resilience and stamina to kind of navigate that on my own. I'm not suggesting that. That's not what I think is the healthy way to deal with things. It's quite the opposite, actually. But I think that part of all of this sort of created a very independent girl. And apart from the fact that I actually thought that I was a boy when I was a little girl, I wanted to play with the boys. I wanted to play soccer. I wanted to race bicycles. I wanted to climb trees. Did not want to play with dolls because the girls were mean and they bullied me. So I actually felt a lot more comfortable playing boys' games. And so somewhere along the way, ambition and curiosity and a real quest for learning has always been there as part of who I am, but also this very independent, very living on my own, being, not having a lot of friends, at least not what I called friends. So I think this all shaped my ability to navigate challenges. I can see that now. Yeah. I couldn't see that as a kid. And I think as a child, I fell into the education that I chose because I loved communication and I loved understanding what drives people. So I started marketing. I was really curious about marketing. I thought it was really super interesting. And I still do. I still love this idea of understanding what drives people. It's what I do every day, right? It's still part of it. And if you look at that red thread that follows through that, I think it's my curiosity about who are we as human beings. And I think it goes all the way back to my mom, trying to understand her, trying to figure out what makes her so sad, but also trying to always figure out what would make her happy. And all of those small nuggets along the way, I think of them as small seeds that were planted in this sense of my real drive for understanding who we are as human beings and why we do what we do and what we need so that we can be happy.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. But it started with marketing. That was my first choice of education, was marketing. And that then was in brand marketing. I worked with Royal Copenhagen. I love this idea of what creates a brand. And the different companies I worked with along the way have all been really high brand conscious companies throughout my time in Europe. And I worked with Esprit on developing their retail concept. And with that, working with the people in the store to train them to understand the retail concept, which then also meant understanding the consumer. So there were so many overlaps in all these things, but you can only see that in hindsight.
Normally, it's beautiful because when all the dots connected backward, right, then you start to see the whole love in your life starting to connect, go back to full circle. And I want to know, back then when you were a little girl and trying to support your mom, your father, and try to understand and make sense of the world in your ability, right? And then did you ask for help from people back then?
No.
What stopped you from doing that?
I think it was I'm not sure. I'm guessing now, looking back. I think there was a very stoic way, like growing up in Denmark, there's a very emotionally stoic environment there. And my grandfather was a butcher. There was like no emotions there. My father was not a stoic sort of man. He was a very curious man, and he was really also very engaged in human behavior. He was a leader. He was an executive search consultant later in my life. And I was always really curious to sit and listen to his conversations with these different leaders. And I found them just so human. And he was working on CEO level. And he was working on very high level of leadership. And those conversations were all just so care-driven and human. And again, at the time, that was not what I would have called it. But now looking back, I can remember, I can tell what really inspired me about it was this very human nature, that for some reason my father was able to connect with people in this very human way. And he always talked about listening. He always talked about our ability to listen to people. And those are some of the things that I still use today as my inspiration. And actually, a big part of my book as well is learning how to listen better to ourselves and to each other.
Wow.
And I think so. A lot of these, again, seeds were planted based on seeing how my parents were navigating life. And so as a little girl, I just, like, there's one thing I always remember, and that was always curious. Always curious. But I was curious about life. I was curious about what it means to be human. And I was always curious about understanding, why am I here? Why am I here? What am I, And so all of those things have been questions in my head forever, as far as I know.
Wow. So we get to the curiosity part and how you nurture that for that very long time at a later time, all right? I want to know, by the time you get into the university and studying to, a major in school, right?
Yeah.
And with that curiosity of knowing why you're here and who are you and stuff like that, now why didn't you go into studying, like psychology or philosophy but you chose to study marketing. So what made you decide that?
Yeah, I think probably because my dad was in a business environment. My dad had also been in marketing, and I think that I don't think growing up in Denmark, psychology and social psychology and that kind of stuff was very sort of discussed or known in the same way as it is today in our sphere today. I do think that later on that is what I wanted to do, but at the time it was sort of like, do I take the sunk cost of my entire education and everything I do and go back to scratch? I wasn't ready to do that at the time. Later on, I did go back to scratch and start over, but in a different way and in a different kind of trajectory. We can talk about that in a little bit.
Sure.
So I do think there was always the psychology in that, but I don't remember thinking of that as a career choice when I was younger. It was always a business idea, because remember, there was also ambition in here.
Yeah.
There was ambition in part of this, and there was always this quest for traveling. My parents took me traveling quite early. When you grow up in Denmark is not very big, and so if you're going to explore something, you got to go past the borders. And so we traveled since I was pretty young. My dad had a quest for traveling as well. And one of the things I always wanted to do when I was a little girl was go to Africa to go on a safari. And I'm doing it next month.
Wow, January or December or January?
December.
Wow.
Yeah, it's my birthday, and I'm turning 60 next month. So I'm going to Africa to celebrate my 60th birthday.
Wow.
Finally, childhood dream comes true.
December, what day is your birthday?
December 16th.
December 16th. Okay, I will make sure that I will send you a birthday message on that day, and make sure you respond to me even if you are in Africa. Okay, South Africa. Okay.
I will be in Tanzania, and I will be hanging out with the hippos on my birthday.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful. I'm happy for you to have your dream from the young kid and fulfill next month. So enjoy that. Enjoy every moment of that. All right.
Yes.
Jeanette, you told me that earlier that there was some incident that happened that did make you leave a very successful career in the fashion profession, right? And then move the trajectory onto the new direction. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, the first big change was leaving Denmark and moving to the US. So I was heading up retail for Esprit in Scandinavia, and had a quite great position for being very young. I was a very young executive. I was 26 years old and running the retail operation. So that was a really exciting, and I met someone and I decided to move to New York with him, thinking I was going to continue this amazing career. Well, I had to start over. So I ended up being somebody's secretary in the furniture industry, but it was in the design furniture industry, and one of the best companies in the world. It was Knoll, and then later I worked for Vitro, which are all very brand oriented and story oriented companies. So I learned a lot. Ended up then after that creating my own design studio. I worked also for a period of time with Peter Arnell, who was the genius behind campaigns such as Donna Karan, DKNY. I learned so much from these different companies, these different people. I feel like every boss I had was a mentor. But I ended up starting my own design company, and I worked with having that for 9 years, creating brand strategy and retail and showrooms, retail stores and showrooms for the fashion industry for contemporary designers. And at some point, I had my second divorce and decided to also leave my business and work with a client that wanted to hire me as their executive VP. During that time, my dad got cancer, stage 4. And while he was in treatment, my mother got cancer for the 3rd time. So all of a sudden, I had 2 parents with cancer in treatment at the same time. And it ended up being in 2 different countries because I had brought my dad to America to get the kind of treatment he needed to potentially have a chance to survive stage 4 bladder cancer. And during that time, my mother got her 3rd breast cancer and had to then get treatment back home in Denmark. So jotting back and forth between that, my mother ended up dying suddenly from her treatment while my dad was in an airplane coming back to New York to continue treatment. It's probably the worst day of my life, having to sit him down and tell him that she had passed away while he was in an airplane and I was at work. And basically she passed away alone. And I continued working in the fashion industry while my dad was sick. I brought him to my house. He lived with me. But I got fired from my job when my mother died, and I started another company on my own, a fashion company. And it was actually quite successful. I brought some old tracksuits that I found in a sort of vintage shop and asked the company to reintroduce these tracksuits, and I made like an underground fashion company out of that. So that was really exciting. But after my father died, I can't do the fashion industry anymore. I can't care about fashion in the same way as I care about people. And I realized that it was really time for me to break up with the fashion industry and instead focus on helping people, as I had burned out myself, partly being in the fashion industry and dealing with all of this. And big part of what made that change for me was the conversations I had with my dad about the leaders that he had had conversations with and his experience in the world of both in leadership and a lot of the conversations we had was about what makes us happy, what makes us successful, what do we talk about when we die? Like, and he died young. He was in his 60s. He was, what do we talk about when we die early? And those things were about what in our lives had mattered, what in our lives had made a difference. And what came forth over and over and over was the human connection. And understanding for me that the human connection that I was craving and had since I was an only child, trying to figure out how to deal with an uncertain childhood and an unhappy mother and being bullied at school and doing all of these things on my own, being a progressive, forward-thinking, very active, young executive, I realized that I was feeling alone. I felt alone my entire life. And the human connection that I talked to my dad about and how important that was, and all the memories we had and we shared was all about things we had done, memories we could share with each other. And I realized it was time for me to really completely change the focus of my life. And so I went back to school. I started learning. I learned nutrition because I also always wanted to be healthy. I was a competitive gymnast. I forgot to tell you that. I was a competitive gymnast since I was 6 years old and until I was about 18. So there's a lot of this that had taught me about the need to have a relationship, have a healthy relationship with my body. Granted, I still burned out twice because I was living on coffee, but you know, I knew that there was something there that was a nugget that I needed to understand, because we couldn't just put clothes on our bodies and feel good and feel happy. We needed that from the inside out.
Correct.
So I think the fashion business helped me understand that this was something we put on to feel good, but the real feeling of good came from the human connection, and that human connection started with ourselves. And one of the reasons why I think I understood that at that moment was because for all the years that I'd been in America, I'd studied Buddhism. When I first came to America, my first divorce, having to start over in my career, I found myself so lost that I started looking at mindfulness and Buddhism. Now, the real reason why I started studying Buddhism was because of marketing. I was really curious about beginner's mind, but then it really got me hooked into understanding mindfulness and this relationship with ourselves, how it affects the relationship we have with everybody else, and how that affects the way we show up in the world, which essentially is the work I still do today. So all of these seeds that have been planted, and then the culmination of my father's death and the conversations that we had during that time, I think it all ended up becoming me making a choice that said, I want to help people live better lives and wake up to this need for human connection that is so inherent in how we thrive and build success together.
See, Jeanette, before your father passed, right? I'm sorry about what happened, but before he passed, he also built some seed inside of your head about the importance of living. It's not always about competing, comparing, about winnings, but it's about human connections. And those conversations, I think that is really, really beautiful, because it's a cumulative of wisdom that he has been having in his life, and he tried to pass it to you so that you can make change and create change, not only for you but only for many many people you'll be interacting later on through your works and through the books that you do also. So very 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 beautiful conversations back then. However, that is one bigger thing that we want to examine here. Is a lot of us, we always have that moment of reflection of negative, right? That, like you say, that forces us to think about a change. But not a lot of us also had the willing have the willingness to put everything in and change, because you've been in the fashion industry for so long, you've been successful in that territory also. So now stop everything and start from scratch into the new path. It means that you eradicate all the works, all relationship, all of the efforts that you've been put on for like 20, 30 years of your life, and then start new, right? And that's scary. So Jeanette, at that point, what courage did you give to yourself to say, I have to change, I have to stop, and I'm willing to restart everything from scratch again?
Yeah. It's funny because my mother always said, you can move, you can change jobs, and you can leave your marriage, but you can't do all three at the same time. But I did. So as it turned out, I changed everything at the same time, right? It's a good question. What gave me the courage? I think what gave me the courage was that the worst that could happen to me had already happened. I lost my parents. I was recently divorced for the second time. I wouldn't say I'd lost everything, but everything had changed already. You could say I'd lost everything, but I don't quite like to put it in that framework, because I hadn't lost everything. I hadn't lost myself. but everything had changed.
Mm.
Everything I knew had to get reoriented anyway.
Mm.
And I knew that I couldn't go back and continue a fashion industry. I tried for a little bit. Of course, I continued my work. I had my own company.
Mm.
I continued that work for a little bit after my father died, but I just realized that my motivation wasn't in it. My passion wasn't in it. I didn't care anymore if it was red, blue, green, or if it was delivered on time. I didn't care anymore.
Mm.
I felt it was, I think I felt that we worried about the wrong thing.
Ah.
And I'm not saying it's not important that things are on time, and I'm not saying that the work that people have in the fashion industry is not important. I'm not saying that everybody who is in production or in any kind of these things that they don't have important work. It's not what I'm saying at all. They have important work. I thought it was important for a long time, but it was no longer important for me.
For you.
Because of what I had experienced. I needed something different.
Mm.
I needed to not worry about, I guess, deadlines is what's coming up for me. I don't know that that's the right answer, but that's the right answer for now.
Mm.
I think I was done worrying about deadlines, and really I wanted to focus on growth. Yes, that feels about right when I'm answering it that way. That feels about right. There was something about I wanted to be involved with growth. I wanted to be involved with what makes us grow as human beings.
Mm.
I didn't want to live in this fear-driven world anymore of being late, of not being good enough, of not getting things done. As much as that's part of everyone's life, in some aspect, there was something about the focus on growth, not just growth of sales, but growth of our humanity.
Mm.
There was something about that just felt super important, because I felt that I had experienced something from losing my parents that I guess I felt I couldn't keep it to myself. Like, as you can tell, I haven't thought this through. This is not the standard answer that I have. Thinking about it as I'm talking to you and you're asking these questions to make me reflect on that, there was something really important for me about growth. That really was what resonated for me. And at the time, what I wanted to do originally was to build a well-being center for cancer patients. And I was looking for funding, couldn't get funding. People thought it was too woo-hoo and too new age and alternative medicine and so on and so forth. And now, of course, we know that integrative medicine is really what everybody's focusing on. But in 2002, it seemed that integrative medicine and alternative medicine was considered too new, whatever. So I couldn't get funding for the well-being center that I wanted to create. And I wanted it to be specifically for cancer patients because I wanted them to have a place where they could feel safe. Which brings me to the next point, right? Is like, that's another seed, right? That was planted there, that I could see that as my parents were sick, they needed to feel that somebody, something, some system, something knew what they needed, because it was so hard. They couldn't fit into the normal, they couldn't go to a normal well-being center or wellness center and work out. They couldn't go to a regular restaurant because they had to make sure that food was cooked. And, there were so many restrictions on things when you're in chemotherapy. And I felt that they needed a place they could feel safe so they could stop worrying. And I think if you're thinking about psychological safety in the workplace today, that's the same thing, right?
Exactly.
Like, what stops us from thriving is that we worry so much. And so I think what I saw with my parents was this constant worry, and I felt it myself too. And so originally that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a place that was safe for cancer patients to be, where they could eat the food without worrying, where they could work out with people that knew how to treat them with their ailments and not be overstrength, like not working out too hard, and acupuncture, but for cancer patients, like all of this stuff, meditation. I wanted to do all of those things, but couldn't get funding. And so I decided to just start a well-being center myself. And Bernie Siegel, at the time, said to me, and he was like, he's one of the first doctors who said that to heal the heart, we need to heal the human connection. And so he said to me, why do you want to make a center for people who are sick only? Why don't you want to make a place for people to learn how to live better? And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. And I started my own well-being center, but needed to be a coach. And that's when I went back to school. And so I think these things was not so much taking the courage to do a big leap. I think it was little things where you turn the dial just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and you discover more and you ask more questions. So one thing I learned from my dad is to not look for the answer, but to look for the questions. And I think that's the process I was going through. I kept asking myself all these questions about what would motivate me, what do I care about, what are some of the things that would make me feel excited about go to work every day, what are some of the things I would look back on and be proud of, what are some of the things I would keep doing when I was in my 70s and not feel that it was work. So I asked myself some of these questions. I didn't set out to be like, what am I going to do? I set out to really explore and ask questions instead of looking for the answers to what was next.
Beautiful. What was the doctor's name again, Jeanette?
Sorry?
What was the doctor's name, the gentleman that talked to you?
Bernie Siegel.
Bernie Siegel. He asked you a very, very beautiful question, because that extending the works that you do, because you originally wanted to build a facility for well-being for people to come, right? But that facility, regarding how big it is, it can serve a certain number of people, and that's it. But if he asked you the question to change to how you can make the people to live better, then it's not a facility itself, but the works that you do can impact a lot more people. Very, very beautiful question that he asked you.
And may I also say that what he realized was to catch people earlier. Right? He realized that if we can focus on what makes us healthy, instead of always focusing on healing disease, if we can help people understand what it means to be healthy and happy.
Beautiful.
And that question, what he asked me, and doing the work that I did after that, made me realize that we focus way too much on what's not working. We focus way too much on disease, when really what we should study is health. We should study what makes us healthy, just like, in companies, they tend to focus on what's broken rather than how do we continue to harness what we have, which is our human resources. Like, how do we understand what really builds good, healthy human resources, which is human beings, right, in the workplace, rather than waiting for when things break down and then figure out how to fix it. And so all of these small seeds that were planted along the way through people asking me questions based on their wisdom, and my ability to listen, I think guided me so that it didn't feel like it was courage that I needed to take those leaps. It felt more like it was curiosity that I needed to keep exploring.
Wow. And then we will get to that curiosity at a later time. I want to go into the journey that leading to what you write the book about. All right. So, since when you decided to write the book, The Self-Care Mindset, Jeanette?
Well, that's quite recent. In a way, you can say. So what happened was that after coaching people one-on-one for 18 years and realizing that I would help them, they would get excited, and then they would go back to work and it would all fall apart, right? So I realized that I wasn't helping people if I wasn't focused on changing the workplace. So in 2014, I think, I started really focusing on how do we change work. Now, I had originally, when I first sort of started out coaching, I actually wanted to focus on well-being at work because I had burned out. But again, it was way too early. I tend to be too early with everything. So it was too early. Coming from Denmark, I already grew up in a well-being culture. It was normal that we had lunch when we did it together. It was part of what cultivated a strong culture, a bonded culture, because we had relationships with each other. And we did that through basically just sharing lunch. And so I already had that mindset. And when I came to New York and started working and I asked, where's the lunchroom? People looked at me like I had two heads. They were like, what do you mean lunchroom? Nobody eats lunch here. And if you do, you eat it at your desk while you're working. I was like, are you mad? And then I fell into the same trap, did the same thing and lived on coffee and burned out. So it doesn't work, right? And so I knew that there was something wrong with our relationship with work. And coaching people for so long, I also saw, and I coached everybody from assistants to leaders, to creatives, to professional, to high performance people, to everything. Like I coached a variety of people, not just leaders. And I always saw the same trend, which was we put work first. Duh. Not a big surprise. We all know that. But what I saw was why we put work first. And it was because we don't see that work is us.
True.
And we don't see that work is part of our self-care too. Because we think of work as something we do. But the reality is we choose work partially because of who we are, what we care about, our skills, and so on and so forth.
True.
And so work is a really big part of our self-care. Work is a big part of who we are. And self-care is who we are. It's not what we do. And so when I was coaching people, I started seeing these relationships and the disconnect between the relationship between ourselves, our relationship with others, and then relationship with work. And I recognized the need to understand those things, those three things, as one unity. Yes, with boundaries between it and proportions between it, but it was still part of one unity. So when people would go back to work and sacrifice themselves to work, I felt it was a misunderstanding of the fact that we're the ones doing the work. Like we think it's a machine that's doing the work. For some it is, people in the factory, yes. But for people who are doing office work and things like that, we are the ones doing the work. So we need to understand that self-care is part of how we think better. And somehow we've just disconnected ourselves from that, right? We have disconnected ourselves from understanding that our bodies, our mind, are the ones doing the work. And we need to take care of this body so that this body can take care of us. And then this relationship, and then the relationship with work. So I knew I wanted to do something to communicate that. And I decided to become a speaker, a public speaker. So I went back to school again. I diminished, like I slowed my practice down and did less and less and less in my coaching practice because it was one-on-one. So it basically was on the hour, every hour. And I was burning out too. I was starting to get, exhausted, emotionally exhausted from that. I went back to school and I started studying professional speaking with a fantastic group of, or a fantastic couple that are training professional speakers called Heroic Public Speaking. And so I trained with them and I did their professional grad program. So I really wanted to understand what makes a successful speaker. I'd already been speaking. I'd already done training programs. I'd already done all of that. But I really want to understand, what does it mean to be a good speaker who serves the audience? And so I got my first TEDx talk in 2016, and then my second one in 2017, and then that was the sort of the beginning of my career as a public speaker, and with a focus on changing work. Excuse me for one moment. And I really wanted to change the workplace. And so I was a little caught in the, you got to prove that self-care changes the workplace and creates more performance. I was like, really? I need to convince you about that? Like, how is it possible that we need to convince people that being healthy makes us work better? And then COVID came, and I didn't have to convince anybody anymore, because now everyone knew that health can tilt the economy and can close a company. I no longer had to argue for the ROI. And we woke up to the human advantage. We woke up to understanding that being human is essential in understanding what makes a thriving culture. And so I've been continuously speaking during COVID to companies who wanted to figure out what are then the skills and the tools that we can teach people to do so and survive work better. And then Riley, the publisher, contacted me at some point in May and asked if I would be interested in writing a book based on my work, because they felt that people were still not understanding self-care the way I communicate around self-care and the way I think of self-care, because I don't actually think of it as self-care and me care. I think of it as we care. I think it's this understanding of how it all comes together and how the relationship with self is really just at the core of everything, not separate from. Wow. And that's how the book came about. Do you want to see it? Do you want to see what the book looks like?
Please. Yay, congratulations. So it takes you from like 6 months to write it and get it published? 3 months. Wow.
It took 3 months to write it. That's what they asked me. They said, can you write it in 3 months? And I thought, probably, because this is my work. This is what I do every day. Because the book is about the 3 pieces that I talk about: relationship with self, relationship with others, relationship with work, as it relates to how we think, how we engage with ourselves and others, and therefore how we make better decisions in the world. And funnily enough, if you can see, this book is actually about rethinking self-care as how we change and grow, which, if you look back at my life, it's always been about navigating change and figuring out how to continue to grow. So I really think it's coming full circle. And the book also focused on using well-being as the foundation for doing our best work, but also what I call work-life quality. So I don't think of work-life balance. I don't think it's a reality in our world, because we don't stop worrying about work when we go home. We might stop working, but we don't stop worrying. And so instead, we need to improve the workplace for us to have better lives.
Well, Jeanette,
I think that's a crucial shift and change. I think that's really an important nugget in how I address this topic.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm curious a little bit, because those leaders leading organization was once an employee, right? Once was an employee, and they went through the childhood. When we were young, we always cared about for one another. We care about ourselves. We care about our well-beings and the well-beings of the friend, the people next to us, right? And then we went into the corporate world, and we forgot totally about that feelings. And then the more you grow up in the career ladder, the more we also forgot about how important it is that I need to care for the people under me, next to me, until the COVID happened, and that shift everything back to the basics of really human connections, right? So I don't want this change to be temporarily. I want this change to be permanently. So how can we help leader in your way of working, in your work experience, to make sure that the well-beings and the human connections, the culture of care will stick, and will stick forever?
That's a good question. Hopefully, by everybody buying my book.
Absolutely.
I think obviously I would love that, and obviously I do think the book can help. But I do think that the point is that it's the work we do every day, recognizing that, because that was also one of the things I realized, right? When I was coaching people, they would go back to work. If they didn't feel they belonged and contributed and that they cared, that people cared about them, they wouldn't go home and care about themselves.
Yeah.
And so the crucial key here really is that human connection, right? It really is that it's not just about doing the work we do, because if the culture is toxic, we're not going to be successful. We're not going to cultivate sustainable success. And as a company, we can be fear-driven and chase success and profit and results, but it will be short-lived no matter how we toss and turn it. It really will be, because we're going to invest too much in continuously investing in new people, onboarding, and all of this stuff, because if people are just burning out, right? It's a little bit the same when salespeople say, you grow your sales not by adding more customers, but by doing better with the customers you have and that they stay with you, right? Right? That's customer care. That's one of the reasons why we want customer care. We want customers to stay with us, because it's easier to grow sales with the customers we already have.
Yeah.
We don't have to teach them about us. We don't have to teach them about the product. They already love us. Employees are the same thing. So I think if we can change our mind and really look at our external culture and our internal culture, it's the same as our external brand, external customer service, internal brand, internal employee experience. And so if those two worlds can start becoming more one, we can become a more whole company, and we don't have to keep fixing the old problem. We can start changing and solving new problems, which is how we constantly navigate change and grow, instead of having to go back and fix the potholes. I call it the potholes in the book, when we go back and fix the old problems over and over, or we're so fixated on the problems and fixing what's not working, just like we're fixing our health rather than navigating how do we actually create. We're fixing disease, but we should really look at how do we maintain health, right? Yeah. It's the same thing. Like, we're solving the wrong problem if we're just trying to fix disease. Instead, we should understand what makes us healthy. And so all of this is really the same mindset. So the same mindset that I learned all of these years from all these different things is really the same mindset that we can apply here when we say, well, what is the real problem we're trying to solve here? The real problem we're trying to solve is to navigate a constantly changing world, which is going to keep changing more and more and more. We have to stay adaptable and agile, which means we have to stay aware. But if we're running on survival mode, we're just going to do what we've always done to stay safe. And if instead we can create a safe workspace by creating a place where we care about people, not just for them, but about them, by listening to them, asking them questions, including them by making sure they know that their opinion matters, and all of these things, right? And this goes all the way down to the people who are working in the warehouse. And I know this because I worked in the warehouse at my first job. And listening to the people who know how to solve the problem in the warehouse, as a marketing person, I learned so much. Because I could sit in my office thinking about all of these marketing campaigns, but if I didn't go to the people in the warehouse and ask them, is this going to work when you're shipping it out, it was going to fall apart. So we actually can look at this coming full circle as how we're looking at us as whole human beings. How do we look at us as a whole company, where all the bits and pieces and parts are the same as the organs in a body, are the same as who we are as human beings? Is like, all of these relationships are all part of what makes the whole thing work, both as human beings, but also as a company. And if we can have more of this relationship with these very complex, actually, but also very simple at the same time, if we can really learn to see these nuances in a new way, I think we can change.
Absolutely.
And grow and create a different world for ourselves and each other. Beautiful. I really do.
Beautiful. See, that's the lesson that your father talk to you
Yeah.
back all the way back then, asking, listening to the people, asking the right kind of question. Because if we ask the wrong question or the question is not articulated big enough, then we keep fixing the potholes like we've been doing over the years, right? We build something new, then we try to find a way to fix the the holes along the way. Also, it's just wearing people down, and it costs a lot more money and efforts and energies to fix it, right? It's beautiful. For the book, I know my next question is not fair for you, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. All right. um if you pick one chapter in the book, and
Mhm.
which is the most favorite chapter for you, uh like, what is that chapter and what is that chapter about?
That is not fair.
I
You're
know.
right. I think I will answer it slightly differently.
Okay.
I will answer it by saying if you read the chapter about power pausing, you have already changed your world.
Mm.
Because power pausing is the foundation for all change. We cannot connect with ourselves or with other people without pausing and listening. And if we think that power pausing is just about taking time off, we have power pausing all wrong. Power pausing is really that moment where we can notice if this is really the right way forward, where we can make a new decision. It's just really mindfulness in action, right? And that's essential. So that's probably the most important thing, to actually make sure you really read the power pausing chapter. If you don't read the book from beginning to end, I wrote it as a process of change through the book. It's written as a process, so that you can still read different things as you go along. But I think understanding the importance of power pausing alone, that is already important change.
Wow, beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. And for our audience, if they want to learn how to change and getting better care of themselves, and the self in here you say is not only about I, not but it's about we, right? It's about the world. So
Yeah.
buy the book from Jeanette and practice it. All right, Jeanette. I have three last questions. All right,
Yes.
and now we go into the curiosity.
Mm.
Your life since you were young, it was a curiosity that led you to figure out how to help your mom, how to navigate life, how to understand people around you, right? And that curiosity has been fueled ever never, like, up until now. And I think that the curiosity level is even increased every day to you, inside of you. How did
Yeah.
you nurture that from within?
We need our sleep. We cannot be curious and tired at the same time. We cannot be hangry and curious at the same time. We cannot be thirsty and curious at the same time. So even just the basics, we have to nourish just the basics. And I want to say those basics are so basic that we've forgotten that we need them. Right? We have gotten up to there where we have all these amazing skills. We have all this big stuff that we need to learn about human skills. It's like, yeah, but this is the first human skill. Drink enough water.
Yeah. So nourishment.
Right. So it's so basic that we've forgotten how important it is. So I think that's one of the things I make sure that my basics are down. And the other thing that is important with curiosity, we can't be stressed and curious at the same time. So I do make sure that when I'm stressed out about something, that I really settle into how do I solve what it is that I'm worried about, and what would good look like. So that I know that I have an aim for solving this problem, and when I have solved it, I'll pause and I'll stop worrying.
Oh, power pausing.
Yes. And so again, I will pause to really make sure that I understand what's the problem I'm trying to solve. I will work very hard on solving it so that I can stop stressing and start focusing again on cultivating success, cultivating growth, being curious, being creative, and solving the right problem, which is how do I continue to change, grow, and respond to the challenges at hand. That's the right problem to solve, right? And so, and I also want to point out a couple of things. And one is that we don't actually get stressed from what we have to do. We get stressed from what we believe we won't get done. So it's very important that when we're stressing over something that we get really clear what it is we're stressing about. Is it that we're worried about something that we can't control? Then how can we let be and trust that we will figure it out? I didn't say trust that it will be figured out. I said trust that we will figure it out. Because it's us that we have to trust, not the situation.
Beautiful.
Okay, and so there's these nuances in these things, like so I make very clear that I tell my mind what I need so I can solve this problem. I ask these questions. And without solving those problems, I can't stay curious, because then I'll just focus on the problem, which is the pothole.
Beautiful. Wow.
Right. And so when I was doing the book, for example, I knew that I had 3 months to write it. So I knew that I had to make sure I didn't fall prey to my own inner critic, but I also had to listen to my inner critic so that I stayed vigilant and that I stayed discerning and that I wasn't becoming arrogant. So what I did was I noticed my inner critic when that was happening. And there's a big part in the book that talks about the inner critic and how to work with the inner critic as well, from a curious place, right? And so I wanted to know what my inner critic was nervous about and scared about, because my inner critic was nervous about something. And then I would use that as information to make sure that I paid attention to those things. And then I would work with an editor to be the one who judged whether this was working or not me. So I had a really good writing coach and editor. His name is Michael Thompson. And I worked with him to really make sure that he was the one who was judging whether this was working or not me.
I see.
My job wasn't to judge my own work. My job was to make sure that I was speaking the truth, telling my story, telling the story of my clients, and presenting good material and tools that people could use. That was my job. My job wasn't to judge whether it was good or bad.
Wow.
I mean, it's very, very clear about that.
Beautiful. So
so that's how I can be curious all the time, making sure that when the stress and the inner critic showed up, I worked with that actively, productively, and then I used that to come back out of stress.
Wow. That leads to the next question, Jeanette. All right. So when your name was mentioned in our conversation with Karen, Leanne, and Tammy, that was when we talked about the topic of thinking. All right.
Yes.
Because my wife and I, we've been on a quest to help people to improve their ability to think, because we believe our thinking ability these days is diminishing. So we need to help the people to make to bring it up, and by asking experts to share how they think, and then share that back to the people who ever listen, then they might have some tips and techniques that they can practice, right? So from your curiosity inside of you and how you manage that, you also deepen your ability to think over the years. So the question we want for you, Jeanette, how have you been helping you to improve your own ability to think over the years?
Well, that's the power pause, really, because without pausing, we will just think the same thoughts over and over and over and over. We will just basically run the same tape in the background. And so the way the mind works is the mind keeps asking questions. And then the question that we ask ourselves is very often why not questions. We ask ourselves, why is this not working? Why is that not working? Why are you not doing this? Why am I not doing this? Why is it not? So we ask ourselves why not questions. And so, because I've always been really curious about how we think better, right? And that's what the book is about, right? Too. It's like, how do we actually use our mind better? And partly because for my mother, right, she was always thinking, her thinking was always so-called in the pothole. She was always thinking about what wasn't working. And that is when we're under stress, cortisol increases, it floods our mind, and we always think about what's not working. We think based on what we're scared of. We want to know if we're safe.
Mm.
right? Do I belong? Do I belong comes later, when we can start calming down. We start cultivating that human connection. We start wanting to belong. And then we can start thinking even better, because now dopamine kicks in. We can start becoming constructive and creative, because we're starting to let go and not be constantly engaged. That's again why we need the power pause. If we're constantly engaged, we don't actually allow that space for dopamine to release and for us to get new ideas. So all of those things are part of how the mind thinks. And so power pausing is really crucial and essential for us to not get stuck in the same loop over and over and over. And so when you talk to friends, for example, who keeps telling you the same story over and over, who keep telling you what they're concerned about, our mind just does that. That's what the mind does. It just keeps repeating the same freaking story over and over, day by day by day. And I think research says that we have the same thoughts. 90% of our thoughts are the same every day as they were the day before. So you can see how we need to pause to actually let new thoughts come in, right?
Yeah.
So so mindfulness training, really understanding how the mind works. My studies of hypnotherapy, also really understanding what happens the way we ask questions, because the mind will answer the question you ask it.
Yeah.
So if you're asking why something is not working, your mind will only think about why it's not working.
Yeah.
But if you say, okay, I acknowledge this is not working, let it be, and then ask, what do I need so I can make it work? Now you're telling your mind what to focus on, and your mind will do that for you. And so now you're thinking about how to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Now you're thinking better. Now you're thinking with curiosity. You're thinking with, what do I need so I can do that? So if you're asking a question, make sure you actually want to find that answer. And that's one of the reasons why I said earlier, it's important that we look for the questions rather than looking for the answers first.
Beautiful.
And that is how we think better, by looking for the questions first. But let them be questions that actually become stepping stones towards the problem you want to solve.
Yeah.
Rather than questions that are all focused in the pothole of what you're trying to avoid.
Thank you so much for sharing that powerful tips in asking questions so that we can move forward and solve out the problem that we want to solve, instead of focusing back on the 90% of the thought that we had the day before, right? Jeanette, we knew your past, your childhood, the works that you do now. Now the last question is about the future. All right. Is there anything that you are working on and Jeanette wants to share with our audience so that we can celebrate with you in advance?
Yes. Well, the book is very new. It just came out a couple of weeks ago, right, on November 1st. So I think for me, the year ahead, 2023, is about growth, both for how can I inspire growth in others? How can I inspire people to navigate challenges and uncertainty instead of feeling paralyzed by it? So I really would like to and hope to really work with getting this book out into the world and teach a lot of people how to use this mindset. That's what I'm really hoping for. And I would like to do that in a big way over the next year or two. But I would also like to write another book in the not near future, because it's too soon already. But I would like to write another book about leadership and culture, using the self-care mindset to really look at how do we seep this into our communities, into our culture, into our workplaces, and so on and so forth. Because I do believe it's a mindset that can have a really positive ripple effect. Yeah. So that's what the future holds for the next, 5 to 7 years. I hope to be speaking on a lot of stages across the globe and travel and do that and really talk about how do we become caring people from a self-care mindset perspective. How do we actually not become caring people? How do we harness that human advantage that we already have, which is our ability to care with intent and purpose.
Beautiful.
And then hopefully go back to Africa more than just this one time.
Wow.
Then come to Vietnam.
I know, Vietnam also, right? So thanks a lot for spending your time and with our show, with our audience. And we learned a lot from you today. Thanks a lot for a lot of insight, advice that you brought into the conversations. I want to say happy birthday in advance to you also. So enjoy your trip to the safari and spend great time there with the people. Enjoy the journey there, all right? And along the way, for all the works that you do, we want you to have a lot of more support. We want you to have a lot of more help and from the people around you so that you can spread the culture of care to individuals and organizations so that they can make works becoming more meaningful for a lot of people because that we are the works, right? We are the one who doing the work. We are the works also. So thanks a lot for doing that, Jeanette.
Thank you so much, and may the pause be with you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
You too, and thank you for everything. It was a great interview. I really enjoyed your questions and your kindness, your attention, and your care for your audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye bye. Say bye bye to Maya first also.
Bye, bye bye.
Bye Maya.